I will teach you a very strong chess strategy that you can use as black against anything white plays. I call this the dark square control strategy. You start by playing the pawn to g6 and then you play the bishop to g7. And most of the time your opponent will play something like this. Two pawns in the center. They can play something else, but it doesn't really matter because you don't need to memorize theory for this opening. All you need is to think about controlling the dark squares. And with that I mainly mean all of these. All of these dark squares are very important. That is why we have this bishop here in the opening. And I also play pawn to d6. And this pawn helps because this pawn is also attacking one of these dark squares. What you always want to do in this opening, no matter what your opponent plays, is to play pawn to c5 at some point. Because pawn to c5 helps, because then you will have three pawns and your bishop attacking all of the dark squares. That is the strategy. If you can play pawn to c5 without any troubles, you should play it. Right here, I don't think that is true, because after this exchange, white would be capturing our queen, and yeah, we would have to move the king, and that doesn't look too great. So if you can't play c5 straight away, which will be most of the time, it's very important to play your knight here to d7, because this knight also controls two of those dark squares, and it allows you to play pawn to c5 on the next move. And if my opponent had captured this, of course I would have been able to play my knight here, but more importantly, if this pawn is gone, then that means that this bishop has opened up. And that is what we want. We want to open up this bishop as much as we can. There are a couple of things that they can do. So they can take. Oftentimes they will also push, but pushing helps us because if they push, you can see that this bishop is now open. And that means that we can start some type of attack if we want here on the queen side. And we want to attack this knight basically and to also open up this bishop if we can. The most common response I think is what you will see here, where your opponent won't take, they won't push, they will just leave everything as it is and they will maybe protect it with something like their bishop. But important to realize here is that our main goal is to destroy this pawn. We want this pawn gone, because when this pawn is gone, that means we will have a strong bishop. So we take this. We always take this if we can. This is a situation you will have a lot of the times where these two bishops are facing off. And of course, you don't want to trade, because your dark squared bishop is the most important piece during this entire game. And yeah, we don't want to exchange that just for their dark squared bishop. So you have to avoid this at all costs. Here I will do that by playing knight to f6. And there are many things that my opponent could do. Usually they will play something very normal. For example, they play the bishop out, we castle, they castle, and then we will just continue with normal development. Maybe play pawn to b6, develop this, move the knight in the future, maybe activate the queen, activate the rook. There are a bunch of things we can do. You can still also try to start an attack here on this side of the board, for example, with b5. Try to attack the knight, try to open up this bishop. Here, they are pushing the e5 very early, but that's not a problem because way at the beginning, we already prepared against this. Because pushing to e5 is one of the better ways for white to counter this strategy. But we have this pawn here on the d6 square, and we basically use it because we want to capture that pawn if they ever push. So that is fine, because still we just want to keep this diagonal open. It would be really amazing if we could just capture and destroy this bishop, because if this bishop is gone, the most annoying piece is gone, and this will open up in the future. But again, we would be running into check. Now we have to take with our king, and now we get into a position like this, but yeah, what happened? We didn't castle, so that doesn't really look right. So what you want to do here is you want to just castle, so that we can potentially take their bishop on the next move. For example, if they had played a normal looking move, which you will see a lot of the time, for example, bishop e2, you can take, let's say they take, well actually that would be a huge mistake. They would have to take here, and you can see that we have now opened up this bishop. We have an attack brewing here. We can maybe even play bishop to f5, we can maybe play queen to c7, and the goal here is to try to destroy their queen side structure, and that is why we need this dark squared bishop. They are playing a very strange but also very interesting move, with the bishop back because they don't want me to be able to exchange, but still their king is stuck in the center. They don't really have any way to castle soon. So I have to think a little bit. This exact variation I have never had, but that's normal with this opening. You will oftentimes get variations which you don't really know, but it's not really a problem because as long as you think about the dark squares, that is fine. So there are a couple of things that we can do here. I think one interesting strategy is to play pawn to a6, which is very common here. If they castle, you basically get an early b5, early attack on their king. And if they play something normal looking, still you just have b5. You can also just develop your bishop to b7. One other strategy sometimes is to counterattack with e5, but that is a very high level, difficult strategy to execute. So I think it's important to focus on your development first. Try to play something solid, for example, as we are playing here. So they won't castle apparently on the queen side because they played the rook here, which means they now have the rook and the queen working together. That means we might have to do some calculation in the future because if this knight ever moves somewhere, let's just play it here for example, we always have to be a little bit careful that this might open up. Wouldn't be a problem in this particular line, but it is something to keep in mind. I think it's fine. I think we can actually just play this pawn to b5. And of course, we have our plan to play the bishop to b7. They are somewhat doing a counterattack, so we will have to figure out how we are going to defend. I think we can take this, and if they take with the knight, that's basically a check. And I think they just have to go back with the knight, and looks to me like white is getting into some trouble. So I don't really see any problems with this. This structure, by the way, was not really important anyways for us. I think we could also potentially push. Attacks the knight. They have to move the knight. I don't really see a good square. Maybe they go here. And if this, I think if this bishop was not here, that would be a good plan because we would be able to take. But here we would be losing our bishop. I think this would be the better plan if that bishop was still there. Yeah, although still you could probably get away with some variation like this as well. But I think I will just capture because this looks to me like white is getting in some trouble if they recapture and if we get to play that check. White's really maneuvering with the bishop here, but that is, I think, a wrong move because if they basically got rid of the bishop on this diagonal, that means we can finally start moving this knight and open up this bishop, which is exactly what we want. I don't really care about protecting this pawn because I think it's a bit of a poison pawn that he can't really capture, otherwise there would be some issues. Yes, he can always block, I know, but it looks to me like there might be some troubles in that line. So things to think about here is, first of all, this knight is pinned, right? If we just go anywhere with the knight, that would be not like this. That would be a huge problem because we would always be losing. So the knight is pinned. That means that we might need to move the queen. That's one thing. We might need to move the queen. I think we could also potentially move this knight and just open up the diagonal. I think that's also fine. I was thinking in a way that maybe we can move this knight somewhere, for example, knight to g4, attack the bishop. But I feel like we are just somewhat getting a type of situation where I just keep chasing their pieces around and I don't really accomplish much. Yeah, so what I will actually do is I think, play out my queen somewhere. Queen here would be a huge blunder. Queen to a5 I think is fine. We are also protecting, attacking the knight, protecting the pawn. I think queen to c7 also makes sense. Probably I think queen to a5 makes the most sense because it's also active on this diagonal. And of course my knight is still protected. Okay, they play the queen to d4. I honestly don't really see why. Not really a reason. Maybe they just want to grab the pawn. Is that it? Is that what they want to do? Maybe they want to grab the pawn. I think that might work for them. The next plan here for black is usually to play bishop to b7. You want to activate this bishop, maybe even eliminate this knight because this knight is attacking two of the dark squares, and also of course get your rooks into the game. But I think I do see some other opportunities here as well. with maybe playing pawn to a3 or with moving my knight, because white is somewhat getting into trouble along this dark square diagonal. The only thing is, I don't think I ever really have any tricks with the knight. That would actually just be a free knight as well. But if I ever move my knight and I try to do something, yeah, I don't really see any tricks. I think they just moved the queen again, and we are really getting into an awkward situation where they just keep moving the queen around. At this, I think we lose the knight, so that's also not so great. My other plan was to maybe push, because remember, it's all about the dark squares. This is dark squares, this as well, and this is a very important pawn, a very important square. If we can attack it, if they take, well, the defender of this knight is gone, and I think now we might be having something here with this discovery. So I think pawn to a3 is interesting. I don't know if it always works, but it looks to me like finally white is collapsing because we have enough control over the dark squares. And that is the entire strategy you need to remember. Just keep focusing all your energy on the dark squares with every single move. If you really don't find anything, you can always play this a6, b5, develop the bishop, which is fine as well. But I think here we just have total dark square control. And you will really see the beauty of this strategy, because basically white is losing here. White is losing. I think we just take with a check, and that's a free piece. And now that I am up a piece, I will ignore my entire strategy. I will give away my best bishop, because honestly it doesn't matter anymore. We are winning, we have a winning position, we have extra material, so all I care about is trading. And this looks to me like it's just a free queen trade, and a free queen trade of course is amazing if you are at material. That looks to me like it's just another knight trade. That also looks fine. Now I just have to develop this bishop, get my rooks into the game. I think this looks like a good move. Attacking the weak pawn, that's another trade, so let's just make another trade. And I know it sounds almost ridiculous, but if we just keep trading everything, at the end of the variation I will always have this extra knight, and this extra knight will always win me the game. This looks, by the way, like an interesting move, attacking the rook and also this pawn, but I think they just go here. But actually, yeah, I think it might be worth playing, because it gets my knight into the game, and also they have to probably either go super passive with the rook, or they can try to counterattack, but we are getting a pawn with check, destroying their castling rights. I'm going to get out here, and maybe we have some exchanges, but it is fine. So what is my remaining strategy? Don't lose the knight. Very important, we can't lose the knight. Trading rooks I think would be great, but I don't really see an easy way to trade rooks, because whenever I attack he can just move. Threatening checkmate is also possible, since basically this king is a little bit stuck. So if we ever move this rook, for example this, I think that's actually a checkmate threat. No, it's not a checkmate threat. Of course, because they can go backwards with this rook. I missed that, but doesn't matter because it's another trade, and we are getting close to a winning position. And I think now this should be super easy to win, or at least it should be. Sometimes it can still be surprisingly difficult if they defend well, but I think all we need to do is just to trade the last pair of rooks, and then we win. But if I don't see a way to trade the last pair of rooks, I'll probably just get some of my other pieces into the game, get my knight into the game, get my king into the game as well. Maybe activate this knight. This is one of those games where basically there's almost nothing you can do wrong as long as you don't give away material. You can't lose. That was a juicy check that I could play, winning the pawn, but it doesn't work. But I think it's fine. We can just push this. Probably play this check with the knight. I'm just trying to see here if there is some way for me to win material through a check series or something else. Maybe set up some type of discovery. We will see if there is ever something. All I'm looking for basically is a way to trade. Trading would be great. And if there is nothing, I think we just push pawns and we activate our final pieces, because everything is still defended. You can see this knight is protecting this, this rook is protecting this, so everything is fine. Since the rook can no longer give me a check, well, I actually just activate the king, I think. I think it's smart if we go protect the knight with the king, because if we protect the knight with the king, then the rook can move again. That's another check, but I will just keep an eye on this knight, because this knight is basically holding together this pawn. That means the rook can move because it doesn't have to protect the knight, and this looks to me like it's a forced trade. Yeah, I don't think there's anything they can do, that's just a trade. And that means we will be winning. I do have to watch out how will I finish this endgame. I think there is even a simple strategy to just sacrifice this knight on b5. It looks a little bit excessive, like it's maybe not necessary. But if they take, which they don't, but if they take, of course, we would just be promoting. So they can't really do much. And here we will always be the one who wins, because we always have a knight that we can somehow crash for one of their pawns if we want, and we can start pushing. I think I will even play this move just so I can stop them if they ever push. Okay, and if they don't, I will just make a queen. Yep, that's this. Check. We can even sacrifice this knight. We can move it actually as well. I'll move it here, but you could even sacrifice the knight. It doesn't really matter. You can just make a queen. Yeah, I'll just let him grab my knight, make a queen. And this should be a super easy win. We attack the pawn. If they push, we give a check. We win it. Now we have to build a little box with the queen. I don't know which is the fastest, but what I usually do is I just stay one knight distance away from the enemy king, and basically that's an ever shrinking box that you have. Now they can go here. I go a knight distance away. They can go here, a knight distance away. Yeah, we can go here. Just make sure they still have those two squares, and then it's basically just go here with the king and then do a checkmate.